right. And I just want to remind us, this is a tech-free zone. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to pass the mic around and have our students introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Michaela, I'm a junior.
My name is Jazan Navarro, and I'm a senior.
My name is Masako Perez, and I'm a senior. My name is Noor Navaid, and I'm a senior.
My name is Bakari Spencer, I'm a senior.
Can you describe your experience at Paly, specifically related to being a student of color?
Okay, so I'm Muslim. I wear a hijab, I wear a headscarf, and I am also brown. So I think like just getting all that out of the way, that makes me, I guess like a double minority in Paly. And I remember just like since my freshman year, just like I moved to the district in 8th grade, and I remember even then I was always kind of walking around a little cautious. Like I kind of was on edge, and this is how I am honestly like anywhere I go. Like even when I go across the street to Trader Joe's or Mayfield, like I'm always like cautious. Like I have to be on my best behavior because I never know if somebody's going to just like give me looks or say something that like people have just passed comments, not to me personally, but like it's happened to my family, and so. I just kind of like walk around with a lot of discomfort, and we were talking before this, just the students and I and Angelina and Miss Burton, we were talking about our general experience, and one thing I shared was that sometimes I walk around and I don't feel like I can express my emotions like a student who isn't normally profiled would. And I mean, by that I mean exactly what I just shared. Like I don't feel like I can be angry, otherwise it's interpreted maybe as like, oh, she's a terrorist, or she's, you know, like she could do something harmful, you know, you gotta watch out. And that just like, I mean, my personality is not in that way at all. Like I've never like been interested in being a belligerent or like conflicting person in any way, but I can't help what other people are going to assume. And I've lived in 5 other states too, and I mean there it was, I used to live in the South, and I used to live in Iowa, and just I think in the Midwest it was pretty bad. Like I remember one time my mom, we were walking to the grocery store, and this guy was in his car, and it was my mom, my little brother, and my older sister and I, and my mom wears a hijab too. And this guy was just driving by, and he was like shouting just really abusive things, and my little brother was like 3 years old, and we were all there and walking, and we were kind of scared, but I mean my mom is an amazing woman. She shouted right back at him, and then we called the police later. She's a boss, like she's amazing, but no, I mean that was a pretty traumatic experience, and nothing like that, you know, nothing like as intense as that has happened in Paly, but I did last year experience something where I wasn't expecting it because, you know, coming to Paly, back to the main question, coming to Paly, I saw that it was just a diverse school. Like, I saw that it was a very racially diverse school. It was, you know, people's political beliefs. There's, you know, it's mostly liberal, I'll be honest, but like there is some diversity in views. But I wasn't expecting anything bad to happen, or anybody to say anything rude or anything offensive. Usually people are kind of, I see a lot of students, they're like, oh, I don't mean to offend you, or like, you know, anything like that, which is sweet, but I'll get back to that later. But last year, it was around May, I was just on the quad. It was my 6th period prep, and I got a Facebook message from a student who was in another class, and they were asking about something they wanted to get up to put on air on In Focus, and then suddenly in that middle of the message, like I'm reading through the message, and suddenly in the message I see, "You're a terrorist," and then it goes on. It was so random. And I like wait a couple seconds, I reread it, I was so confused, like I mean I was just like, this is not happening, this couldn't have happened. And then right after I get this long text, and it was explaining that, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, my friend took my computer and they typed this in, and they meant to delete it, he meant it as a joke, but I know it's not a joke, like I'm very sorry. And so, you know, I at that point I was first like, okay, well, I didn't mean anything. I'm just like, personally, I don't like to get into conflicts, and so I didn't want to start anything also because I didn't want to be thought of as like, oh, Nora, she's a snowflake. If you guys don't know what that means, it's just like super sensitive person who's always like on edge, or just like, oh, you were offending me. I never want to be that person. But then at that point, I was kind of just shocked because I wasn't expecting it to happen in Paly. And I showed it to my friend, and honestly, it was such a blessing that she was there, because she was just like, Nora, you have to give this to admin. You have to report this. This is not okay. And so I went immediately to the Wellness Center, and they helped me out, and they took me to Mr. Paulson. And we talked it through, and then I ended up having a discussion with Mr. Berkson and then Mr. Hamilton later, with both of the boys involved. I mean, honestly, I really appreciated what the administration had done at that point, but I also just didn't feel like there was any real takeaway, because even the students' apology seemed a little, it just didn't seem very genuine. And also, the irony was that we were in a communications class. We were also like learning together about the detriments of positive stereotypes, let alone negative stereotypes. And so, I mean, I think that our teacher did a lovely job of teaching us that, but it kind of was like ironic to me that the student didn't really understand, like even after that lesson, they still thought it would be funny to throw out a really negative stereotype. And it is a stereotype, like there's nothing funny about that, because after 9/11, there were a lot of, like, let alone like Muslim people, there were a lot of brown people or South Asian people who would get murdered for just walking on the streets of like New York especially, just because of their appearance. So that's not a funny thing in any way. It's not a joke. It's not something I would take lightheartedly, because it actually affects people in a very negative way. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that was just my experience overall, and then in Paly too.
So I heard you say that you were in a communication class where you were talking about the effects of stereotypes, and so you're in class with students. I'm just wondering, is your feeling that students don't take classes like that seriously, or don't take the lessons like that seriously?
I think that because the topic we were discussing was very sensitive, I know that our community is such that we don't like to say anything offensive. You know, people don't want to, like, they were like, oh, I'm just making sure, like, I don't want to offend you or anything like that. And you know, I appreciate that, but then it also doesn't seem like people are very genuine. It seems like a very surface thing, you know, because otherwise it's just not a norm. If you're vocally, if you're just vocally targeting or vocally, like, verbally abusive to someone, that's not a norm in Paly. It's something you would immediately get reported for, and people would give you like the side eye and stuff like that. But I don't feel like people genuinely took it seriously.
Bakari, do you want to say something?
I would agree with Nora about saying how people being on edge, like how people like look at you.
Put the mic a little closer to you.
Personally, like going around Paly school, you gotta like personally, what I do, like I kind of on edge as well, because like a lot of people, like since I'm like from not like around, people like look at me like differently, or kind of like, and sometimes like people walk by, you can like hear certain like things being said and stuff like that. So I was just saying like as well, like, you're also like, outside of Paly as well, people do like the same thing, they look at you differently based on like what you look like and stuff as well.
So like when you go to Town and Country, do you feel like people look at you like an outsider?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, they like look at you like you're like different.
And then you have to really speak into it like this.
All right. So all right. So I said that like at Town and Country and like Paly around, like I'm kind of like on edge because a lot of people, like when you're walking by, they like look at you differently, or they like as you pass by, they like say like remarks that you don't think you hear, but you know you heard it and stuff like that. Like it's going around.
So you hear comments, but
Yeah, you can't really act on it because then you don't want to like be a stereotype of some sort of way.
so similar to what Nora was saying, where you feel like you can't get angry, you can't react, because then you are playing into that stereotype.
Yeah.
And something about that is that when people have those thoughts and they don't say it, they don't get a learning, they don't get a learning experience. Thank you. They think that because they didn't say it out loud that it didn't offend anybody. But when they think it, they live their life, continuing to think that way, and they go on to adulthood thinking that what they thought was okay, and they pass it on to their kids, and so it follows through generations. And the thing is, even though they kept it to themselves, they weren't genuine, and they didn't get to learn. They didn't get to, be re-educated, or they didn't get to see life from somebody else's perspective, simply because they kept their ignorance to themselves. And although that's, we don't want to hear everybody's judgment, sometimes a learning experience for one can also be a learning experience for all.
So that if people were more honest with what they were thinking or saying, and would just say things out loud, it would give the community an opportunity to look at that and talk about it.
A lot of the students also here say, no offense, but just don't say it. It's offensive.
So they know that what they're going to say is offensive.
Yes, just take it into consideration. Step into that person's shoes and see from their point of view. Just don't say it if you think it's wrong. Like we learned in kindergarten, don't say it if you think someone's gonna feel some type of way.
Another follow-up question I have is when these conversations or these comments are made in classes, do teachers intervene, or do teachers just kind of let it go? And what would you like teachers to do?
There was an incident my freshman year where a student walked up to two kids who are of Latin descent, and he had said something about immigrants and that they don't belong here. And the two kids didn't know how to respond, and I've known them for a long time, and so I jumped in and I had said something, and the teacher had gotten me and the two kids in trouble, even though we weren't the instigators. We were kind of sent outside of class, and it kind of made us seem like the bad guys when we hadn't gone out of our way to insult somebody. We were just defending ourselves, and I think that kind of hindered not only our learning experience, but the way we talk with teachers and the relationship we have with them, because it didn't feel like somebody who was supposed to help students and educate students took that experience to make it a learning one. Instead, they just kind of punished the kids who they figured were just being loud. And so I think it made it hard to go back to that class over and over again, not just for me, but maybe other students who heard the comment and didn't agree with him.
Thank you. I'm going to change the focus a little bit. Are any of you first-gen students? And do your teachers know that you are a first-gen student? And if so, have any of your teachers encouraged you to go to college or helped prepare you to be more successful?
So I'm a first-gen student, and I'm very proud to say that. Both of my siblings, they have jobs, and they're married, and they have kids. And my sister, she's a nurse assistant. My brother is a pharmacist technologist, so they're both in medicine and that. I want to go into early child development. I really like being with kids, and I have a lot of nieces and nephews, so I just like the atmosphere about being around kids. So if any of you guys need me to babysit, I'm there. But yeah, a lot of teachers don't know that I'm first gen. They only, because of either I'm Mexican or African American students, they just assume. They don't really ask us, oh, are you first gen, or has anybody else in your family gone to college? They kind of just oh, this student is first gen. They don't ask us, they only assume, like I said.
When you say they assume that you are first gen, or that you're just not even going to college?
Both. They'd assume that we're first gen, and that because we're the race that we are, that we're not gonna go to college. I had a teacher in middle school told me that I wasn't gonna go to college because I'm Mexican.
Where did you go to middle school?
I went to JLS Middle School. A lot of the teachers, they seem to want to encourage us, but they don't really take the steps to be like, hey, like, you know, actually do the steps that it gets you there to college. Like a lot of the students they hear say, I want to go to college, but I don't know what the steps are to get there. Or I want to go to college, but am I really going to do the things that it takes to get there? Which a lot of the first-gen students do need that support from the teachers because they're first-generation students. They don't know the steps that it takes to get there. My mom, she's English learning, so I'm basically the translator for her at doctor's appointments, phone calls from school. So that's like a 3-person job. I have to do my homework on my own because she doesn't understand it. When teachers call, I have to be like, oh, this is what the teacher said. You have to go to this meeting, and this is what it's going to be about. So it takes a lot for someone that's doing college, being a student, a translator to their parent. I think, honestly, like, I'm a super person because I do all of that.
I agree. We agree.
But I think it's also hard for me to be able to speak in Spanish because I've like gone to a school that's mainly English speaking. A lot of my Spanish has gotten really bad. So it comes to a point where I want to explain something in Spanish to my mom, but then I'm like, I just say it in English. I'm like, no, I can't say it. Like, I have to find a way in order for her to understand and to be able to get it so she can understand.
So there's a trade-off between language and culture and then pursuing a college education.
I just wanted to speak on that too. I'm not first gen, but I think a lot of people do assume that I am simply because either my last name or where I come from. I do live in East Palo Alto, so it's just because our demographic is very different from Palo Alto. And the language thing is, my mom was first gen, and her mother's priority was to teach her English. So my mom only learned English. My grandmother is from Japan, and so when my mom had us, my 3 siblings and I, my mom and dad had discussed, my dad is also an immigrant, my parents had discussed that they weren't going to teach us another language, that they were going to solely invest in us learning English so that we can, be part of this American dream that we will speak the language, we'll speak it correctly, and nobody will judge us otherwise because we know this language through and through. And that was for our survival. And so there's times where I wish I could speak in Spanish so that I could talk to my family. And there's times I wish I could speak in Japanese so that I can talk to my family. And because my parents always thought it was more important that I spoke this language, I give up connecting to both my sides of the family.
So I'm not first gen either, but a lot of people assume that I am, and the thing is, like, they won't even ask. Like, I don't mind questions. I actually am like a huge advocate for questions. Also, like, I think it's important that people are mindful of how they ask a question because oftentimes people will assume things in their question. I think like a lot of people will just be like, oh, you were born in Pakistan or you were born in Saudi Arabia. I'm like, oh no, I was born in Rhode Island. Like, no, I'm not even from California. Like, people do assume that often. And my experience has been very similar to yours, Asa, because my parents, I don't know, they just never really got around to teaching us our home language. And I think that it does have a lot to do with the survival aspect that really spoke to me because, we really do have to speak the language or to pull off an American accent in order to fit in and to be like, oh, she doesn't have an accent, it's fine. Like, I've had that experience before. People will be like, oh, your English is so good. I'm just like, what do you expect?
That's a compliment, yes.
Thank you. But I mean, I've been living here all my life, and I don't know. I don't understand that. But I think like if people, what I meant when I said people often assume questions is instead of asking like, you know, what religion are you? Why do you wear? I honestly don't mind. Like people can say, why do you wear this on your head? Even if they don't know the name. I don't expect people to know what this is called all the time. But I would appreciate if people ask questions, because otherwise, you know, what you were saying too, Giselle, like, or yeah, I mean, in general, what you guys were saying about how oftentimes they're like, oh, no offense, or they also just don't want to, people here don't want to say something offensive. And I honestly would rather people just talk about it, because the experience and that discussion that you get out of just talking about it is very important. That's why I introduced myself with my religion and race, because that's what we're here to talk about. I'm not gonna be like, you know, this is that. I'm not gonna beat around the bush, because we have to be really honest, and I think that is what's gonna be the most beneficial for us to move on.
So I'm going to ask the next question. What would need to happen to encourage more students of color to take APs?
Well, I feel like it's kind of, I feel like a lot of people assume that by sophomore year you're going to be taking 3 APs and you're going to be acing all of them, all the AP tests and all that, and you're going to get into Stanford. And I don't think that there's a lot of like support with that, especially for minority students. And if you look around, there's not a whole lot of minority teachers either to help us with that and help us understand like what we're learning. There's a lot of like information thrown at you and not really like taught, like why am I doing this, you know what I mean? It's like, you need to do this, but I don't really understand why, and like that would be helpful. This is my first year taking an AP, and so far I think it's great. I really like my teacher, and yeah, but before that I didn't think that I could take an AP class, and I really,
How come?
because I didn't think that I would understand the material. I didn't think that I would be able to catch up, because from what I know, AP classes move really fast. And I'm a really slow reader. I can't read a book in 2 weeks. And I didn't think that I had a lot of like I would ask my teachers, like, can I find this online, like for a book, so I could listen to it and not have to read it. And that's really helpful. But it wasn't always something that was offered to me.
So no, a teacher never came and said, I think that you'd be great in this class, or you might really enjoy this class, and that was never offered to you?
No, it was. Yeah, I did have one teacher that would tell me like, hey, you should take this class, because I think you'd be really great for it. And that's really helpful, but I don't think that that's for all students. Which like, I don't think that it should be like pushed on every student, but more encouraged. Because I think that minority students don't think that they can handle it, but non-minority students just think that it's like the thing to do. Like it's just.
Why do you think that kids of color don't see themselves as being able to handle AP work?
I don't think we've been given the proper tools to. Not that all minorities are first gen, but there are instances where there are minorities who are first gen, and like instances like Chelly where they can't talk with their parents about this assignment. Or Giselle, I'm sorry. They can't talk with their parents about these assignments, or, you know, like some families just don't have either the education or the language to teach their child that they can be more than what they think they can be. And I mean, for many like white people, that's just the thing. Like, it's not if you're gonna go to college, it's what college you will go to. And for us, it's if. It's always been a what if. And so we just haven't, no one's used the correct language with us to teach us that we can be more. And that goes with the tools. We don't have as many things, and if we live in East Palo Alto, there isn't AJ tutoring. There aren't really programs that invest in having highly educated people to come and sit down with us and teach us the material and really make sure that we understand. And so there's kids who are in this district who have lived in Palo Alto all their lives and they've had a math tutor since like 6th grade. And I didn't know I could get a math tutor. I got one last year. And so we haven't been funded with the proper tools to be able to believe in ourselves like many other students would have.
I just wanted to add on to that, like with the tutoring thing, I think that a lot of teachers just expect that we're going to have a tutor outside of school, that we have the time or the money for that, and a lot of minority students that I'm friends with don't live in Palo Alto, so we have somewhere to be after we leave school, and we have other type of commitments.
I go to the Boys and Girls Club in East Palo Alto. I've been going there since I was in 2nd grade, and it's a really great resource for students. And I still go there. And like they said, there's limited resources. There's a limited amount of space where they say, oh, we're not taking students anymore. But I've had actually the opportunity to be in a lot of programs and take a lot of internships over the summer. I took an internship at Google over the summer, which was a really great experience. And I also have a college mentor that is guiding me through the whole process. And of course, I have Miss Laguna and Miss Mendoza that have my back here.
So we've got just 5 more minutes. Well, I think what I want to just say is, like, what do you want your teachers to understand about your experience as students of color here at Paly? And we'll just do it. Look around.
I think one thing is we always get assumptions thrown at us, whether it's just an everyday conversation or when you meet a stranger. And I think for teachers, your assumptions should be, any assumption you have about a person should be thrown out the window as soon as you get a teaching credential. You should come into the room willing to teach any kid regardless of race, but race and religion and socioeconomic background and disability, but know that you have the tools to be accommodating, and if you don't, you can talk to somebody. As a teacher, I'm pretty sure there's not very many resources, but in this district, I feel like there's so many resources that as a teacher, you can learn and you can educate yourself, not to have assumptions, but to be ready when a student needs you.
I mean, back to what I said earlier about questions and trying to make sure that the questions don't have assumptions in there, like, oh, you must feel like this because of this, and then that's kind of a question in a way. Those are not good questions, because then I immediately I'm just like, but that's not the case, and then I feel very unheard from, but I feel very unheard from by the teacher. And I also just feel like the teacher, exactly what you said, Masa, like they should not be making assumptions, or they should not be feeling like they should be prioritizing certain students over others based off of race or religion or any sort of differences between students. And I do feel like sometimes singled out, and I mean, I'll go back to another experience in class whenever.
Nora, I'm gonna have to
Oh, we have 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, sorry. But yeah, definitely just assumptions, no assumptions, but more questions, I think.
I agree with what both Lasa and Nora said about assumptions, and I also feel like if you, not just like to assume everyone, like if you're going to make something, assume that everyone's like the same, and not like have like assume more about someone than someone else for no reason, just for meeting them and stuff like that. I feel like that's something.
So kind of like what Bakari said, like being treated like the same, and like I like when people treat me like I can do anything I want to do. I can be anyone I want to be if I work hard enough, and I want to be able to have the tools to work hard enough.
This goes for all of us, I think. We don't want you guys to feel pity for us either, just because we're saying this. We don't want you to be like, oh, well, now that I've heard from these students, I think that I need to change my perspective on how I teach all students. That should have been the first thing that you did when you started teaching. You should treat everyone fairly and equally as if they all look the same. So.
I want to thank each and every one of you for being brave and courageous and coming and sharing your experience with us. Can we show these guys some love, please?